How do we know anything? Has anyone ever asked you that? Or have you ever had that midlife crisis where you're questioning if you know what you know? Well, in my article, I share a little bit about my thoughts on language and deception and how things kind of play together when it comes to a language problem. Now, I believe all problems are fundamentally language problems. And in my article that I'm going to read to you guys, I'm going to unpack what I mean by that and why I mean that, and I guess some practical implications on what this is going to look like. I'm Lewis Ridley, and let's get into the video. So, on my Substack, we've got the title, How Do We Know Anything? Language as a Flawed Medium for Truth. For context, this article I wrote probably, I'd say 6 to 12 months ago. I have this document where I kind of brain dump my ideas with conversations with people, podcasts and books. And this was kind of a semi-synthesized idea that was kind of semi-complete, but not finished. And I wrote just in a massive sitting, probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, just non-stop, writing things, and then I stopped. And now I've completed it, kind of polished my extra thoughts in there. So some of the views in here were kind of pre my metaphorical understanding of how to communicate, and was more, I guess, just scratching the surface of Ludwig Wittgenstein's work. So it was very kind of pioneering in my, I guess, problem solving when it comes to these language problems. Let's continue. Why all problems are fundamentally language problems. Fun fact, all the photos in this Substack I took on my 35mm film camera Canon AE1, which is pretty cool. My biggest fear in life is the fear of being deceived. I would always doubt facts and truth claims. I would hold an underlying fear of believing something, thinking it was true, but realizing it was all a lie. This led me to the question, how do we know what we know? This question stems from the research field of epistemology, which uncovers all about the theory of knowledge and the methodology behind belief and opinion. The layman's general experience with this usually arises stereotypically within a midlife crisis. For me, at the age of 16, I had my first real meta-epistemological experience, Sonder. The idea that other people, randoms and passers-by, have their own unique life, experience, darkness, and views. To me, this felt like empathy got an update to empathy 2.0. This led me down a path of understanding how other people think of things and how they know what they believe to be true, and ultimately, how language is a means of communication. Now, there's a lot there, but basically, when I was 16, I was on an exchange trip to Japan, and I was kind of having an identity crisis. I thought that I was a basketballer playing at elite level, aspiring to go to America, but I didn't know what I wanted, and I didn't know who I was. And studying a language was the step towards getting a good SATs, or I guess diversifying my resume when it comes to an academic/athletic scholarship. So my parents said, let's do Japanese. I wasn't the best at doing all the sciences, so I decided to drop one of those to do a language to kind of diversify my portfolio. So I went on an exchange trip for only just over 2 weeks to learn the language and try and get as fast-tracked my language ability as possible. And on that trip, I was walking through the Shibuya crossing, or the Shibuya crossing, or Shibuya Kosaten. And I walked across it, and if this is the largest, most densest populated area, I'm pretty sure, on the planet. Or maybe it's just the largest, densest populated crossing in the planet. Anyway, it was huge. And I remember walking across and stopping right in the middle of it and just looking around. And it was like a coin just dropped. And I actually had a real encounter, actually. I felt like a spiritual experience with God, that I believe it was God. And it wasn't an audible voice, but it was an impression that every single person here will either confirm or deny me. And that just shook me. And obviously, it felt as if the words were coming out of me, but they weren't even from me. It was weird. But I felt this impression of like, whoa, this country is like incredible and there's something on here and wow, people have their own thoughts and opinions and there's just so many people passing by, and it felt like time froze and I could see that person, they're gone, walking across into a building, never see them again. I had the first experience of Sonder. And why I call it empathy 2.0, it's like, do you remember when you first became conscious? It's like at one point you just like goo goo gaga, and the next minute you're like, my decisions can impact others. If I be nice to others, they tend to be nice to me. Or if I take something, how would I feel if someone took it from me? It just felt like an upgrade version of that. So that was my first real point of epistemology, of like, other people have other thoughts, and I'm like, how do I know that my thoughts are real? And it was just this really actually dark experience in my life. I'm like, what is the meaning of life? Why do I play basketball? Why do I study what I study? What's it all for? Why am I working hard at school? Who is God? And it was a crazy journey. So yeah, that was kind of the experience that led me down this path. Language problems are the people's problems. I want to tackle this idea through a linguistic lens, as my central claim is that all problems are language problems. More specifically, all problems are semantic problems. Semantic meaning, just things of definitions. Many people reading this would know Dr. Jordan Peterson, and many people would share the same frustration regarding his rhetoric. For me, it was the discussion between Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson, with Alex O'Connor as the interlocutor. Interlocutor. Such a weird word. This was the conversation that tipped me over the edge with Jordan Peterson's communication style. Now, it's a long podcast, but for those unfamiliar, in a nutshell, the whole discussion felt like a definitions game between two people trying to rationalize what's real and why the premise can even be used throughout an argument. Both parties could not agree on what real meant. It was like a metaphorist was speaking directly to a literalist. For example, I saw this as a comment section on the video. It was actually a great comment. Peterson would say, "The line between good and evil is cut through every man's heart." Dawkins, absurd. So I can't do a Dawkins impersonation. Absurd. If your heart was cut into two, you'd surely die. Now that's what it felt like. It was really, really hard listen, but yeah. And this is what I believe. It's a semantic problem because we can never define what we're actually talking about. And this is why I think Ludwig Wittgenstein opens similarly in Tactus that philosophy communication is just bad grammar, because we have to figure out what words we're using and what they mean from the recipient to even talk about the thing itself. Because if we don't know what we're talking about here, how can we even convey anything effectively, naturally, or efficiently? It's just bonkers. The medium of communication. Air is the medium for sound to travel to our ears. Sound needs substance to travel from A to B. In the same way, language is the medium in which human reasoning is comprehensible. I'll repeat that. Language is the medium in which human reasoning is comprehensible. Take the term objective truth, or a statement that is 100% agreed upon, if that's even possible. The only way a claim like this can be explored is through language. Duh. Science, spirituality, empiricism, rationalism, and even transcendental idealism from Kant are all ways of describing truth. The word describe, though, is problematic because it inherently presupposes that a detailed account must be conveyed through language. It's like me saying to you, wakaru? You need to know Japanese, the language, to understand the language, what is being said. If I say grab the goopity-gok and you don't know what a goopity-gok is, how are you supposed to know what I'm saying? Obviously, this is like, oh, duh. But you may ask, Lewis, 2 plus 2 will always equal 4 regardless of the use of language. The idea that maths transcends language and time. I argue that language is at the forefront of reason itself. Without it, there's no debate about what constitutes consciousness. In order to understand, we must use language. Can we even share ideas that 2 plus 2 is 4 without language? How can we prove it is true without language? We could argue that mathematics is the language of truth. We could argue that language is the language of truth. But without it, how can we prove anything? We can't even discuss and disprove anything if we can't even communicate anything, right? We use language, something we are born with, which humans may never truly comprehend, to try and understand what we are and how we work. Thought itself is a type of language that is used to reason with the world. The human consciousness must use language to organize its reasoning and rationale as a means to transfer meaningful ideas from your subconscious to your conscious. Now, what I'm saying is I believe that there's a language that we can't even comprehend that we're using. It's like a subconscious language that's kind of prompting you to use the language with which you're using to reason with itself. It's kind of like a language we don't even know. It's like a purist form of like, yes, this is what this is, or this is what I think it is. And then your brain kind of grabs that and it kind of goes down into your conscious from your subconscious, and then it comes out as what we call language. But fundamentally, it's kind of lost its kind of meaning because we're flawed. I know, wild take, but that's what I believe. I don't know why I believe that, but it just seems to, I don't know, it's a theory. This claim poses the question of, is language a prerequisite for consciousness? Well, you first must define what you exactly mean by language and what you exactly mean by consciousness. This is where my claim that language is the medium in which human reasoning is comprehensible is most potent. By definition, my claim suggests that it is literally impossible to effectively convey truth 100% through language, as no one can agree on a definition of something or even truth itself. Although Jesus did claim to be the way, the truth, and the life, but that's a conversation for another time. Now, honestly, when I wrote this like a year ago, I was really wrestling with, can truth actually be conveyed? And if you ask me now, like, I still wrestle with the idea that there's no way to prove it. Like, how can I know for sure that you know exactly what I'm trying to say to you? Like, by definition, it's impossible. That doesn't mean it doesn't feel that way. Or it doesn't mean that it's, doesn't be conveyed as a practical way, because we all know that 2 + 2 = 4. And that's just true. But how do we know what we know? It gets complicated. It's like, like the tautology. It's like a bachelor is an unmarried man. It's like that is the same thing within the thing. It's like a triangle must equal 180 degrees. Like that is, the truth is within itself. So you could argue that there are truth that can be understood 100% by definition, but to be effectively conveyed, it could be open to debate. Ludwig Wittgenstein talks about the language games as an attempt to explore that each human has an independent idiolect, which they themselves don't even understand. This is known as the beetle, according to Wittgenstein. I would like to propose a new way of perceiving language to introduce to you a language game between me and you as the reader of this text. Now, I learnt this in my undergraduate. My professor would say, we have idiolects, sociolects, ethnolects, dialects. There's different types of lects. And then he'd go, language is a collection of lects, meaning there's lots of different variations of like subshells. And an idiolect is basically your independent language that only you speak. That there is a variation of yourself that speaks that language that no one else has. This is the Lewis language. And I argue that that idiolect is evidence towards non-transferable, validity of truth. Like, how do we know exactly what we're saying if everyone has their own idiolect? It's like, if idiolects exist, by definition, there's no common, there's not a solid, there will always be pieces of uncommon ground that isn't common between idiolects by definition. So this is where I want to introduce the corrupt zip file. I understand that my claim that language is the medium which human reasoning is comprehensible is flawed, as I'm using language as a means to convey my ideas, knowing full well that it is legitimately impossible for me to 100% convey everything that I consider to be true to you, the reader or the listener or the watcher. Now, I'll put a little comment in here. At the time of writing this, I did not delve into the metaphorical beauty of conveying truth. If interested, it is conveyed in my article Beyond Words, How We Speak of the God We Experience. I do believe there is an essence of truth to be told through language, and that is done through metaphor. And without metaphor, there's no way of really experiencing the truth. And I feel like truth can be said to some degree, but without it being fully experienced, there's no way of knowing that what is said is actually true. However, if what I say is to some level close to the truth of this matter, I believe the language game I'm sharing with you will prompt your reasoning center of the brain closer to the truth within my claims. Now, what I mean by the language game, I'm basically saying we are playing a game. I have an idiolect, you have an idiolect, right? We have an individual language center that only we have and only we understand, right? Different from the beetle, just only that we understand, right? As we play this communication game, we chat about something, you and I are connecting the definitions that we're communicating to each other. So that if I chatted to my wife about this, the beetle, or anything on this article, she'd have no idea because she hasn't had the prior prompting to catch up to speed. We're like language models that have a chat history. And that is what a language game is. I'm playing this language game with you, and now that you understand what I'm saying, we're building and adding onto it. It's just like learning anything. You know, when you read a scholarly article on an area you haven't read before, and like there's a word you don't know, but then if you don't know that word, you don't know what's being written. So then you have to learn that word. And then once you've learnt that word, you then understand that sentence. And then that word is used next to another word you don't know. So then you have to learn the other word. And it's like you need to learn the meanings of this stuff. You need to play a language game to catch up to know the rules on how to read the report. In the same way, this language game that we're building together, I hope you will learn something. That's what I mean by that. Now, imagine that each person has a zip file above their head or in their brain, which holds all objective truth inside. The complete ideal, the truth. So not the idiolect, not that we know what we know, like our own personal dialect, but the subconscious language, the truth. We call it the zip file. The complete ideal, as if you were made in the image of God himself, and that zip file represents that in some way, shape, or form. So I'm trying to articulate this is the perfection of your languageness, basically. You do not know what is inside your zip file in the same way that Wittgenstein's beetle, but you are able to double click it and decompress your zip to exchange truth/information to others, subconscious to conscious. You are beginning the process of synthesizing your data from your internal world based on your external prompting and internal reasoning abilities. An example, person 1 wants to talk about love with someone and double clicks their zip file to unpack, which they don't truly know what's inside. Person 1 says the statement to his lover. He says, "The blue sky reminds me of love." When person 1 thinks deeply about this statement, what was pulled out of his zip? The blue sky reminds me of love. He literally cannot convey what he is actually wanting to say, but what he said was the best he could do in that moment. But with time, he may get closer to what/how he wanted to convey it. This becomes a language game for eternity and must be played to get closer to that true meaning of expression in that moment. Person 1 tries his best to be truthful with the uncompressed file from his zip, but still remains unable to know what the original file contained. So when the zip is unpacked, the sentence of intention comes out and will be close to the true idea, but not perfect. The evidence for this is people can never truly agree on what a definition of a word is, like Jordan Peterson's debate and any relationship for that matter. So there's a lot here, and this was really hard for me to write. But basically what I'm saying is the language game for eternity, meaning he says the blue sky reminds me of love. But when he's kind of like dispensing with this person, he actually doesn't know exactly what he means because we can't define anything. But when he keeps thinking about it and keeps articulating what he's trying to say, evidently he's getting closer to the subconscious meaning of what he has to say. It's like an exponential thing. The more you talk, the closer you get to the graph, but you never touch, but you're still getting closer. That's what this is. The more we dispense with what we want to say, the closer we are getting there. Hence why podcasts are watched all the time. Hence why we talk to each other for ages and we actually get close. Like we feel like we're getting closer to understanding something, but we can never get there. Language works the same way. It's an infinite game of trying to get that closeness of the meaning, right? But truly, this is evident that we can never get there because we never know anything what we're talking about, and people have debates and they never define words correctly. And if you're in any relationship whatsoever, what you mean does not mean what you say, and what you say does not mean what you mean. Each of these words carries meaning that on the surface conveys practical meaning, but on a deeper level, it is incomprehensible, like I explained earlier. Incomprehensible to person one, but also person two, as they both will never truly know the correct meaning of the decompressed version of the phrase, "The blue sky reminds me of love." This sentence doesn't mean it is not real. I'm just arguing that they don't know what they're actually saying. Person two needs to ask themselves this. In fact, if you are connecting with anyone and want to avoid a misunderstanding, consider the following. If what that person is saying is not objectively true, and they themselves can't express that truth to me, what would their original compressed ideal version of this idea be? Now, what I'm trying to say is, if what they're trying to say in their subconscious, in their purest zip file of the truth, the objectivity of what they want to say, gets corrupted from the subconscious to the conscious, and they're trying their best, what we need to do as the receiver of that information is go, this is what they said, what are they actually trying to say in this moment? And I'll read this again. If what the person is saying is not objectively true, right, subconscious, we don't understand what it is, and they themselves can't express that truth to me, so we realize, hey, what you're saying, you actually can't say it properly because you yourself don't know what you're trying to say, but you're saying it practically because it practically makes sense. But in reality, well, in theory, they can't express that truth to me. What would their original compressed ideal version of this idea be? What would their ideal version of that be? And if you ask that subconsciously, who knows, it might benefit you in discourse. This is where person two opens a space for a communal zip file to be shared purely between person one and person two. This is what we're doing right now. We're actually having a communal zip file where you and I have this language game that your mates that listen to philosophy wouldn't really get, because we're building this communal zip file, this communal ideal that none of us can really access, but we're kind of getting closer. It's like this endless game of trying to understand what we're trying to say. This is where the language as a tool builds to become beautifully effective. When a new communal zip file between two communicators is created, a new language game has commenced. Every word used in this new language game between person one and person two is creating its own individual semantic, pragmatic, and overall linguistic variant of understanding that only person one and person two are building to understand. Like I said before, we are building this connection that only we will truly know, because in the context of everything, if I said to you zip file, right? Your definition of zip file in this moment is very different from if you just said a zip file to someone else. Why? Because of all of the prior context and the prompting that we have given, your brain has now assigned my meaning of zip file, or it's added my meaning of zip file to your linguistic lexicon as a definition that others won't. That is what a language game is, in my opinion, in this context. And it becomes a communal zip file. This level of language is the discourse language game of resolved understanding. In order for language to serve its function as a tool, it must consider three key concepts which I believe entail all elements of language and communication. Effectiveness, efficiency, and naturalness. I yap on that all the time. These three terms are my attempts to create a transcendental image of communication that links beyond the traditional ideas of language. This can be done through non-verbal means as well as verbal. Conclusion. Language is a beautiful tenet that holds us together as humans. Delving deep into the epistemology and philosophy at the end of the day is just bad grammar. It's an exchange of sounds and utterances that trick our brains into thinking it knows what is being said. In practice, it does make sense. In theory, nothing can truly be known. But maybe it can be experienced. Oh, that's a lot, guys. But that's what I'm kind of endeavoring towards, is my theory of language and how it kind of works practically. And theoretical linguistics is fun, but it can be quite wasteful of like, who cares, right? But I find it fascinating. It's all kind of a theory that that makes sense to me in some ironic form. But yeah, I hope you guys learned something new. I hope you guys enjoyed my thoughts. And please, drop a comment down below on what you think. And if this is all a load of nonsense and makes absolute no sense and it's all just heresy when it comes to logic, please enlighten me. I'm not super stubborn with my thoughts. It's just a shower thought that's fleshed out, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So yeah, appreciate you all, and stay tuned for another video. Peace.